Revere POV. The winds howled around Revere with every swing of Rionim's greatsword. Despite the heavy, repeated impacts against her barrier of ice, she felt that she could withstand the onslaught for a good while longer. Revere and Rionim had been training for the better half of the day, properly testing the limits of their mana hearts and Revere's mana rings. By now, they were measuring the extent of Rionim's endurance, as he actively maintained his stone skin barrier, as well as imbuing his blade with his wind magic, all while actively attacking a hard target without stopping. Suffice it to say, despite having expended a considerable amount of mana with all the other training they did today, he managed to already exceed his previous limits, while putting out greater effects by a good 2 minutes. While Rionim was already showing signs of tiring, Revere couldn't wait to see how he fares next time when he's at full strength, instead of when he's already exhausted.
"Alright, Rionim, that's enough. You performed wonderfully today," she thought to him through their bond, knowing audible words wouldn't reach him, with all the wind he was throwing around.
With that, Rionim stopped on the backswing of his next strike, relaxing as he stabbed his blade into the ground with a huff and a satisfied grin.
"How was that? I lost track of time, but that felt longer than usual, no?"
he asked excitedly, watching as Revere dispelled her ice barrier. Revere made her way over, reaching up and patting his arm with a proud smile on her face, noting how he still radiated heat from his muscles, despite how extra chilly their immediate area was, thanks to their training.
"Yes, you managed to go past your previous limit of 5 minutes, while exerting everything at once. Though I suspect you might be able to do even more than that. We'll test you again when you're better rested," she enthused proudly as she pulled away, noting all the frost that had built up in the small clearing around them. Rionim flashed a cheery smile despite his exhaustion, lifting and sheathing his blade when he felt a tapping on his leg. Turning to look, he spotted a particularly buff-looking squirrel trying to get his attention. At that moment, he recognized that they shared a bond through Vidmory, and thus took a knee and held out his hand for the squirrel, at which the squirrel climbed on, as Rionim stood up once more. The squirrel chattered and squeaked at him, and though it took a moment, he understood the gist as he looked over at Revere.
"Hey, this squirrel wants us to follow it. Apparently there's someone hurt nearby."
Revere looked mildly surprised by that comment, but when she looked at the squirrel in question, she understood how and why a squirrel would be talking to Rionim.
"Very well, let's see what we can do to help," she said, as Rionim set the squirrel back down on the ground.
The squirrel then scampered off towards the tree line, making sure not to go too fast, so as to not lose the duo. It only took around a minute of walking, but once they rounded some brush, they spotted and recognized Rita, sprawled out in the tall grass, along with a small army of squirrels and birds looking her over, before they scampered and fluttered away to give Revere room, as she hurried over to check on the half-elf birdkin. Looking Rita over, Revere noted a bleeding gash on the side of her head, which didn't bleed nearly as much as a head wound should have. Once Revere touched Rita, she quickly realized that her skin was very cold to the touch, but Revere could sense she was still alive, thankfully enough. Working quickly, Revere pulled a healing potion from her bag, uncorking it as she poured a little bit of the potion over the head wound, and then carefully went about making Rita drink down the rest. Pulling back, Revere then pulled off her robes as she looked at Rionim.
"She's cold to the touch. I need you to pick her up and hold her close to your chest," she ordered,
as she then draped her robes around Rita.
"What? Oh, okay,"
he responded, not entirely sure why he was being told to do this, but not doubting her intuition, as he carefully scooped Rita up, holding the comparatively small woman close to him, as her head laid against his chest, her wings hanging limply behind her, but not dragging on the floor, thanks to Rionim's height. Despite only following orders, he could feel himself heat up more out of mild embarrassment, due to the sheer fact he's had little experience with women,
beyond interacting professionally with maids, warriors, adventurers, or soldiers. Revere paid no mind to Rionim's current emotional state, instead focusing on Rita, as she reached out and placed a hand on her back, using what she knew of life magic to stimulate Rita's mana and boost the effects of the potion that was used on her. Once she was satisfied that there was nothing else that could be done to improve her current state, she turned her attention to the squirrels and birds around them. "Does anyone here know what happened to her?" she asked curiously. In response, the birds and squirrels chattered among themselves before a different squirrel scampered over, getting on a low branch close to Revere. It chattered out an explanation of what they collectively knew, how they were watching their training, enduring the icy gales of wind that were created while Rionim was striking at Revere's barrier, and how after one of these bursts of wind, they noticed Rita fall out of the sky and crash land. Revere sighed softly as she pinched the bridge of her nose before nodding in understanding. "I see. Thank you very much for the information." She then looked among the others and lowered her head for a moment. "Thank you for looking after her." With that, a number of squawks, squeaks, and chattering were heard, as most of the birds and squirrels dispersed, though a few lingered around. Revere turned to look at Rionim, and gestured for him to follow. "Looks like we accidentally knocked her out of the air while we were training. Here, I thought we weren't far away enough from the haven to avoid that," she considered with a soft sigh. "Let's move away from here and set up a fireplace. I don't want to walk around too much with her still recovering like this." Rionim nods intently, following after Revere while carefully adjusting his grip on Rita, being very mindful of where his hands were, as well as making sure not to let her wings touch the floor.
Is she going to be okay?
He asked curiously, as they walked along. Revere nodded after a moment. She was knocked unconscious after hitting her head on a tree branch, if the splinters are anything to go by. But between the potion, her own mana, and the healing magic, it's only a matter of time before she wakes up. It could have been worse, but thanks to her being so cold, she didn't lose nearly as much blood as she could have. They walked for a while more, until the air warmed up thanks to the distance they had put between themselves and from where they had been training. "All right, sit here and keep holding on to her. I'm going to get a fire going and let Vidmory know what happened," she explained, as she started gathering wood for the fire. Not bothering with any sort of kindling or even stones, as she went about piling odd branches together near Rionim. Holding her hands out, she used earth magic to create a raised ring of dirt around the wood, before igniting it with a spark of fire magic. Rionim, for his part, had to take a minute to figure out how to sit down. Carefully shifting Rita around, as he brought his arm around her wings, and gently closed them to her back before slowly lowering himself down to a seated position, as he tried hard not to jostle the young mage around. This time, Revere seemed to notice how extra careful he seemed to be handling Rita, looking on curiously before flashing a kind smile. "You okay over there, big guy?" she asked, settling down on the dirt across the fire from him, as she let herself relax. Rionim blinked with confusion, looking over at Revere as he still cradled Rita, not having set her down in his lap at this point, since he was instructed to hold her to his chest.
"Yes, she's very light, so I can probably hold her for a very long time."
Revere just shook her head, looking vaguely amused before speaking up once more. "That's not what I meant. Never mind. You're doing great," she offered kindly, before closing her eyes. "Give me a bit. I'm going to reach out to Vidmory." After a grunt of confirmation from Rionim, she focused fully on the bond with Vidmory. She could sense he was a little busy at first, but after a few seconds, she could feel him reach out through the bond and make the connection.
"Hey there, Revere. Everything all right?"
"Yes and no," she admitted, before continuing. "Rionim and I were sparring deep in the woods, making sure to keep ourselves isolated, so nobody got hurt. Well, somehow it seems we managed to knock Rita out of the air, which caused her to crash land and knock herself out." She could sense a spike of alarm from him, though he seemed to calm himself as he responded.
So, I take that you've already stabilized her to the best of your ability. Is there anything you need me to do?
Revere smiled to herself, appreciating the trust he had in her. Yes, Vidmory, she's stable now. I just wanted to make sure you were aware of the situation. We're just waiting for her to wake up. She felt him thinking a little while longer before responding.
All right. Let me know when she wakes up. I want to make sure she doesn't have a concussion.
She could understand the word he said, but she didn't really know what he meant by it. A concussion? What's that? She asked, hoping he would clarify.
You don't know what a concussion is? He asked,
after several moments of silence, and when she came up blank, he seemed to consider it some more before continuing.
It's a type of condition that happens after a serious head injury. If she has one, I'll tell you more, he explained simply. Is there anything else?
No, Vidmory. We'll let you know when she... Though as she was thinking, she heard Rita start to stir in Rionim's arms. Ah, she's up now.
All right, I'll be on my way over then.
Stay where you are. With that, she could feel the connection wane, and her thoughts were her own once more as Revere looked over to the others. Rionim had wide eyes, not sure what to do now as he looked between Revere and Rita. It's one thing to be sharing body warmth with an unconscious person who needs it, and it's a whole other thing to be cradling a woman you barely know. Revere, for her part, felt a mixture of pity and amusement for the young Balkan man, as she stood and made her way around to them, gently tapping at Rita's shoulder. Rita, can you hear my voice? How do you feel? Does it hurt anywhere? At that, Rita stirred more, shivering as she snuggled into Rionim. Not yet. Too cold, she mumbled under her breath. This only caused Rionim to stiffen more, as he hesitated to even breathe now that Rita was at least half awake. Revere couldn't help but chuckle a little bit at his expense, but doubled down on her efforts as she tried to wake Rita properly, shaking her shoulder as she spoke out. Rita, you need to wake up now. You suffered a blast from a very powerful combo of ice and wind magic and crashed. Not to mention you're making Rionim heat up more than he needs to warm you up, she mused, while pulling away once more. Rita's eyes fluttered open once Revere said all that, her eyes darting around curiously, before looking up to meet Rionim's eyes, her cheeks starting to heat up, as she quickly realized what she had been snuggling into. Hey. Rionim swallowed anxiously, but was at least polite enough to respond.
Hey.
Revere smiled, looking between the two youngsters as she chuckled a bit. Oh, look at that. It seems Rita managed to warm up nicely. Go ahead and set her down, Rionim, she mused, as she made her way around the fire and settled down again. Rionim obliged, carefully maneuvering Rita around to set her down, while Rita helped herself do the same, attempting to flare her wings before realizing she had been wrapped up in some robes. All in all, she looked very confused, still trying her best to remember everything that happened. You said I crashed, right? Why, Revere piped up as she tilted her head a little, while looking Rita over. Your body was also freezing, cold to the touch. Rionim here is a great heat source, so between him, my robes, and the fire, we helped you warm up. Oh, as for your injuries, it wasn't anything a potion and some life magic couldn't handle, she explained helpfully. I see. Thanks, Rita replied slowly, gently rubbing her head where the gash had been. Blinking a few more times, it looked as if she was still waking up, as she glanced between Rionim and Revere. Ah, that's right, she exclaimed suddenly, before addressing Revere. I came to look for you. I need your advice and perhaps some tutoring, if it isn't too much trouble. Revere wasn't expecting that, but smiled kindly as she nodded a bit. Well, It's been a century since I've actively taught magic to another mage, but... Well, no, that's a lie. I did teach Vidmory some of the basics the other day, and I'll likely keep teaching him more. She shrugged a bit before regarding Rita. I'd be happy to offer any assistance or advice you might need.
Rita nodded intently, having taken off the robe by now, as she carefully folded it up before passing it over to Rionim, who quietly took it from her hands.
I'd like to learn more about dreamwalking and how to safely navigate dreams, while not fully immersing myself into the viewer's perspective.
Rayveer considered this, before having a realization and offering Rita a pitying look.
So, you've reached day 1 of the apocalypse of Vidmory's world?
She asked knowingly, though she then considered something.
I would have thought he'd be more mindful of his memories by now.
Rita nodded intently as Rayveer spoke.
Yes, I suppose my curiosity got the better of me after I spoke to Jack. I could tell Vidmory was an odd one, though I never expected just how right that description was. It's one thing to hear he was from a different world, but another to get to experience it,
she explained, with clear awe in her voice. Her expression fell as she considered what she saw.
I never thought things would get that bad. But you just called it an apocalypse, didn't you? Was it truly the end of that world?
Rayveer tilted her head from side to side in consideration.
Well, do you intend on seeing the rest of his memories?
Rita blinked at that before nodding after a moment.
Yes, despite the harrowing experience I witnessed, I would like to see how things go.
Rayveer smiled at that before nodding her head.
Then, all I have to say to that is...
She brought a finger to her own lips and made a soft, shushing sound.
Spoilers,
she mused kindly, before chuckling a bit.
But in regard to your request, I'll be happy to teach you more about dreamwalking tonight if you're up for it.
Up for what? Vidmory asked, startling everyone there as they turned to see him come into view, as he passed through some brush. It was vaguely unnerving, to say the least, at his sudden appearance. Rayveer knew just what his body could theoretically be capable of, and what he was capable of before even having magic. But considering he likely came from the mountain when he told her he was on the way, and now here he was, looking only mildly dishevelled, and otherwise fine and not out of breath, well, the idea of it all only stoked her ego at how well her creation was performing.
Dreamwalking practice,
Rayveer said with a kind smile as she regarded him.
Rita recently began walking your memories and wanted to know how to do so more safely.
Safely? Are there risks and dangers to such things? Vidmory asked curiously, looking genuinely concerned by the notion as he walked over towards Rita and began looking her over with a vague intensity.
As with all things with magic, it all depends on the will of the user, as well as a number of other parts that come with understanding and experience,
Rayveer readily explained.
Dreamwalking poses quite a few risks, especially for those just learning, but it can harm even the most experienced of dreamwalkers. There are levels to dreamwalking, and the first and easiest to achieve is by placing yourself directly in the place of the dreamer and experiencing what they experience firsthand.
I see, Vidmory murmured as he took a knee. Rita, please look into my eyes, he instructed, before speaking up once more. By the way, you've been calling it dreamwalking this whole time, but isn't this more like some kind of memory magic? He asked, while continuing his examination of Rita.
Of course, but as I'm sure even you know, dreams are just memories mixed with imagination, viewed through the eyes of a drunk, she mused almost mischievously. Or something like that, anyways. Another reason it's called dreamwalking, as it is a form of magic that can be willfully done while sleeping, and can be used for many things beyond wandering the memories of another.
Vidmory hummed in consideration, before pulling away from Rita and offering a smile. It looks like you're going to be fine, he mentioned, as he stood, and sat by the fire between Rionim and Rayveer,
looking upon everyone there. So, why the sudden interest in dreamwalking? Revere gestured to Rita. It seems she's been exploring your dreams while using the most direct form of dreamwalking. The trouble is that she's reached the day, well... Revere hesitated, scratching her cheek as she glanced over to Vidmory. The day when things started falling apart. Vidmory looked... well... It was difficult for Revere to place his expression, but it was a mix of many things. He offered a simple nod before looking over to Rita. I'm sorry you had to see that, he said, before looking to Revere. I actually wanted to ask you about that. Just about everyone with a mana ring has seen my memories, though even Zassatir with just a mana heart has seen at least some of my memories. I would like for you to teach me how to prevent it, he asked with a rather heavy heart. As I'm sure you and a few others know, I've seen terrible things, and I've done even worse things to others that I wouldn't wish to be in the minds and memories of my worst enemies. So before the children in my care become powerful enough to access my memories, I want to be sure I can keep them from it, so that I don't burden them with those images. Revere knew exactly what he was talking about, turning to regard Rita, before looking to Vidmory once more. Of course, Vidmory, I understand. I shall do my best to teach you. If it's okay with you, do you mind waiting until tonight before we start? Vidmory offered a small smile and nodded. Sure, I don't mind. He then looked over to Rita curiously. If you still want to learn about my past, despite what I just said, well, you're a grown woman. I won't stop you if you're truly interested. Rita blinked with surprise, but nodded slowly. It was clear to Revere that her curiosity only grew more intense after hearing what he had to say. She couldn't blame her, but that only meant she needed to make sure to train Rita properly before she started venturing too far into his memories on her own.